Here we are again, ready for another exciting East Tennessee adventure. We have often read, as I am sure have also many Americans read, about the list of some of the best and the worst U.S. presidents of all time. One of the men who always stands out on the list of the worst U.S. presidents ever was Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln after he was assassinated. So, we were so surprised when we realized and discovered that the Andrew Johnson National Historic Site is here in East Tennessee. Who would have known?
Who would have known?
And we are on our way there to see if indeed he was really one of the worst presidents ever. Let's find out. I think we're going to get probably a different picture at the National Historic Site, a different opinion of him perhaps than what is more commonly known. So for all you U.S. history buffs, and for those of you who aren't, we're going to maybe have a few laughs along the way. So let's go.
Let's go.
We're heading down the highway. We're about 50 miles or so from Greenville, the home of the Andrew Johnson Memorial Park. But what to our wondering eyes should appear but a huge plant in the distance, and it's got a huge Bush's Original Baked Beans can at the entrance there, and it is a bean factory. And we had no idea this was here, and so we're gonna go. Whoa, we're gonna go check it out. Look at here. There's a Bush's Family Cafe. I see people coming out with sacks, Tanya, and I'll bet they've got. They must have beans in there.
They have a general store and a museum.
And a museum. Well, we can't pass that up.
And I wonder, beans, the magical fruit.
The more you eat, the more you toot.
Shall we find out?
No, there's another part to that song. The
more
you toot, the better you feel. So let's have beans at every meal. Let's go check it out. Andrew Johnson can wait. Well, we are in Chestnut Hill, Tennessee, the home of Bush Beans, and that must be one of the Bushes there with his trusty bean hound.
And there is Jay hanging out with the Bush Bean Canine and his buddy.
And here's one of the beaners right here, Tanya Beanhead. Okay, let's go in and check it out. We're in Greenville, Tennessee, the home of Andrew Johnson, the 17th President of the United States, and we're outside the Visitor Center. As I mentioned at one point, Andrew Johnson is almost universally regarded as one of the worst United States presidents in our nation's history. Now, admittedly, he came after Lincoln, who was regarded as one of our best presidents, so following Lincoln was a pretty hard act to follow, but Andrew Johnson, according to what I've read, didn't do himself any favors. So, for example, when Lincoln was about to be inaugurated for his second term, the current vice president at that time was Hannibal Hamlin. He gave a few remarks and then asked Andrew Johnson to make some remarks, and apparently that was appropriate at that time when the president was inaugurated. But apparently Johnson was so drunk that he rambled on for almost 20 minutes, which was unheard of, because actually it was Abraham Lincoln's inauguration that was taking place, and he just went on from one subject to the next and was semi-coherent, and and the former Vice President Hamlin pulled on his coat to try to get him to stop, and Abraham Lincoln just sat there with his eyes closed, not knowing what to do. So he didn't get off to a great start. Then 6 weeks later, after Lincoln was assassinated, they went to get Johnson to let him know. Again, he was so drunk they couldn't get him to wake up. They finally got him going. Johnson went into the room where Lincoln was. Mary Lincoln screamed for him to get the hell out of there. So he went back to the place where he was staying. Then after that, he got either continued to get drunk or was so drunk that they were trying to get him up so that he could be sworn in at 10 o'clock. And apparently, at least that went smoothly. At least he'd sobered up enough, or at least faked it, so that he was able to make it through that. So he was a slave owner. He was a white supremacist. At one point in his presidency, he made the comment that the United States is made up of is a country for white men, and as long as I'm president, it's going to stay that way. That didn't win him a lot of friends. Lincoln chose him to be his second vice president because he was trying to bring the country together, and so he picked somebody from the South, Andrew Johnson. So he had kind of a tortured 3 years and 323 days in office. Okay, now we're going to go into the Andrew Visitor Center and see if it tells a different story. I would imagine so, since this is his hometown. Okay, here we're outside the Visitor Center right now, and I should also mention that Johnson was the first president to be impeached, and having escaped being removed from office by one vote in the Senate. So Andrew Johnson was a tailor by profession, and what they've done here in this visitor center is they have moved the original tailor shop into the museum here, and so it shows it here. And he was apparently very successful at that and was a maker of fine clothes here in East Tennessee. The Memorial Center talks about essentially the fact that Johnson got kind of a raw deal, and we'll leave that to anyone who reads the history books. But apparently what had happened was Johnson had fired the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, who had been appointed by Lincoln, and this was in violation of the Tenure Act, and so that was enough for the Senate to say, the Congress and the Senate to say that, well, this was unconstitutional, you couldn't do that, you're in violation of this, and we're going to impeach you. But he was found not guilty because they did not get the Senate did not get the required number of votes. They needed 36. They only got 35, and so he remained in office till the end of his term. Afterwards, Johnson came back here to Greenville in 1869, and he wanted to prove that his case of being almost removed from office was unjustified. So in January 1875, he was chosen to represent Tennessee in the Senate. At that time, senators were not elected by popular vote. They were chosen by the legislatures of the state. So this is the first time that an ex-president ever had been able to get back and serve in the United States Senate. It didn't work out terribly well, however, because a few months later, after he started serving in the Senate, he had a stroke that left him paralyzed. 4 days later, he had a second stroke, and then he died. And so that was the end of Andrew Johnson. After reviewing the information that was presented in the Andrew Johnson Visitor Center, I came to the conclusion that, Andrew Johnson, I don't know that he got a bum rap in being impeached, but it was, given the situation at the time, it was almost impossible for him to succeed. Number one, he succeeded Lincoln, who was a very popular president. The second reason, but probably the most important one, is that Johnson was a Democrat, and in a Republican majority Congress. The Republicans, of course, were the party of Lincoln. The Democrats were in a minority, and the Republicans were very, I guess what I would call Union strong. I mean, they looked at the South as a vanquished enemy and really wanted to kind of put the screws to him. Johnson may have tried to stand up for some of the interests of the South, but it was practically impossible for him to accomplish anything. What would happen is, just as we see in today's politics, the Republicans would pass some legislation, Johnson would veto it, the Republicans would override his veto, and it would go into law. And this happened several different times. Plus the fact that Johnson probably wasn't all that congenial of a guy. It didn't appear, his drinking aside, it didn't appear that he was the most agreeable, and probably made a lot of Republicans mad, and eventually would lead to his impeachment. As far as the slavery issue, yes, Johnson did own slaves, but halfway through the Civil War, after the Emancipation Proclamation, of course, he freed his slaves. Actually, he freed his slaves before, in Tennessee before the actual Emancipation Proclamation, and then he kept his slaves on, but paid them a wage. So in any case, it's a very interesting part of American history, and if any of our viewers are interested in that at all, we urge you to take the time to go to Greenville, Tennessee, and visit the home and final resting place of the 17th President of the United States. Bye-bye.